A Trip into the Darkness. Chapter 13. At some point, Mallory made herself get off the floor and start pacing. She was still groggy, but she would not allow herself to sit still all day, every day. She'd go mad if she couldn't move around. She had thought about trying to read the book that was left for her, but the thought of the old English writing style made her eyes droop without even looking at it. The sound of the door clicking open in the room had her pausing mid-pace. It hadn't been that long since she ate, maybe an hour or two. The metal door swung open, and a huge man quickly walked through the entrance. Confusion struck. She didn't know what was happening, but fear, dread, lust, and hunger ambushed her conscious mind. Was he here to offer his blood? Within a second of the man entering the room, the door swung shut behind him. He was bald and wearing a black suit and tie. His shoulders had to be twice the width of her, and she swore the giant standing before her was at least 7 feet tall. Cocking her head to the side, she studied him and wondered if he was on steroids. His muscles were bulging within his black suit, and it looked like he could tear out of it at any moment. The image reminded her of the Incredible Hulk. However, his face held a closer resemblance to Mr. Clean. What? Mallory started to ask him a question, but the colossal of the man wasted no time rushing her. With a squeal, she shot back in fear, assuming he had come to her prison to crush her. There was no place to go within her concrete box, and he was fast. Before Mallory was able to escape his clutches, he was on her and had her back pushed against the wall. With one meaty hand on her shoulder, he lifted his other arm and stabbed her in the neck with a needle. Within seconds, the room started to spin, and her vision gained black spots. With a grunt, the brute of the man released his hold on her and took a step back. "You motherfucker," Mallory whispered as she sunk to the floor. She was vaguely aware of the door opening and closing as the Hulk made his exit from the room. So this was how he was going to drug her from now on. Sitting in the Hulk to do his dirty business because he was obviously too busy terrorizing other innocent people to deal with her. So much for simply skipping her next meal. She slumped further down the wall and closed her eyes. Tilda. Mallory was only partly aware of what she assumed to be the next few days. Food would be delivered, which she might or might not eat. Then Hulk would make his daily appearance to stab her in the neck. He never said anything, and he was always back out of the room before she fully hit the floor. She eventually picked up the Jane Austen book and started reading it. Unfortunately, it was extremely difficult to read and comprehend because of her drug-induced haze that she was always trapped within. Currently, she had her legs pulled up to her chest and was sitting on the red rug in front of the bathtub. Mallory had the book open in her hands, gazing at the blurry pages. She had to focus with all her might to make out the words on the paper. She was fairly certain that this was her own personalized hell, having a book that she didn't really want to read, but felt like she needed to, while struggling to make out the words on the paper. Thinking back, she had actually had nightmares similar to this one. When the door clicked open, she looked up, expecting to see Hulk rushing at her. Rather, she found the creator of her current nightmare and the master of her customized damnation. She should have known without looking up that it was Troy who came to visit her and not the Hulk. His energy rushed to her, setting her skin on fire, and her mouth immediately started to throb as the smell of his blood hit her nose. Her stomach clenched and her throat was on fire. He was wearing a dark gray suit today with black dress pants. His hair was perfectly groomed, and he had a slight smile on his lips as he looked at her on the floor. Even with his simple attire, Mallory thought he could easily have been on the front page of a men's magazine. His physique was every male's dream and every woman's desire. Mallory hated his guts for looking so good, and her vision turned red. "Back to ravage and rape my body?" she growled at him, as he took his usual seat in front of the bed. "I would not call what we shared rape, my dearest pet," he practically sang from the chair. Mallory scoffed loudly at his response. "You took advantage of me while I was all but unconscious, you foul psychopath." "You need my essence to survive, so I gave it to you. What else transpired between us was lust. I did not hear any complaint or words of discouragement as you came multiple times." Besides, we were both stayed half-clothed, Troy told her as he looked into her eyes. Anger simmered and burned within while she glared back at him. She knew he was right, but it still did not absolve him from taking the opportunity to have her body and blood when she was too incoherent to justifiably deny him. He had preyed upon her weakened state like the predator that he was. Troy, you used my body without my consent. Just because there was no penetration does not mean that it was not assault, she yelled, baring her lengthened teeth. Dear Mallory, I do believe that's the first time my name has left your lips. Perhaps the next time you say my name, it'll be while I'm inside of you and you're screaming out in ecstasy. Mallory shot to her feet, and the book fell to the floor with a small thud. Grabbing onto the wall to stabilize herself, she hissed at him and said, "You will never touch me again, or I will gut you." Such threatening words from a girl that will inevitably go insane and die without the blood and energy that I am willing to give her. Tell me, Mallory, do you want to turn into a rabid animal that has no control over its own body and impulses? Because trust me, my dear, that is exactly what will happen if I do not take care of your baser needs. Troy told her while leaning forward on the chair. Mallory wished that she felt disgust, hate, or anything besides the raging hunger and lust that were coursing through her. It made her feel weak. She was certain that Troy could see her internal battle as he continued to lean forward on the chair, watching her every movement. The way he was looking at her set her on fire and made her want to go to him. Agitation filled her, along with the desperate need to pace. Her left leg started to bounce as she stood there. She was afraid if she let go of the wall, she would either fall over or rush up to him and begging him to give her what she needed. "How long have I been in here?" she asked, trying to distract herself from everything. Troy sighed and sat back in his seat, seeming disappointed at the change in their conversation. "Well, it's been just over 5 days since the last time I was with you." Troy's response was not an answer to her question, but it did make her freeze. 5 days? How was that possible? She figured maybe a couple of days max. Her sense of reality really was messed up. "Has to be the drugs," she thought as panic sunk in and she ground her aching teeth. "What have you been doing?" Mallory asked, glancing up at him. She needed to know something about the outside world, outside of her boxed-up hell. Troy crossed his arms over his chest and stared at her. She was certain he was trying to decide if he wanted to let her in on his secret life. Maybe trying to deduce just how much he should tell her and what he should leave out. She wanted to believe that his hesitance was because he someday planned to let her go, and he didn't want her to know too much. It was probably an illogical thought, but it was comforting. "I own stock in the pharmaceutical empire, and my company has recently released a drug called lorazepam, which was designed to help mask the symptoms brought on by arthritis. This drug was supposed to be a breakthrough because it would massively reduce the customer's need to ingest over-the-counter pain medications, thus aiding to preserve the overall health of the liver and of the arthritis sufferer. Unfortunately, there have been some ugly side effects for those who have been prescribed it, which my company had not been aware of. These past few weeks, I have been preoccupied with dealing with the defects and the people who have suffered. It is vital that I find a way to cover up this mishap so it will not pollute the company's image," he said. Mallory's heart dropped in her stomach with his response. She was not prepared to hear anything close to this statement. It seemed so private and secret. She had a hard time convincing herself that he was lying. After all, what would be the point of lying about something like that? Even worse, if it wasn't a lie, then he must truly be planning on keeping her here forever, or killing her off someday. She hoped for the latter because she could not be trapped in this fucking room for the rest of her life. Pharmaceuticals. He must be rich, because that was a huge and controlling industry. Mallory's mom had been convinced that the government was trying to kill and poison the entire population. It is common knowledge that people in westernized countries consider herbalism and holistic medicine as an alternative and taboo source, even though nature has been used to heal and cure people of their ailments for thousands of years. In just a few short decades, Big Pharma was able to convince the entire population that natural medicine is worthless and that only loony people would use things as simple as herbs to heal their bodies and minds. Plant medicine was replaced in modern world by petroleum-based chemicals that never cured the consumer, but instead created dependencies. Mallory had never had strong feelings on this topic, but looking at the man who claimed to be part of Big Pharma's world, she could see her mother's point. She remembered all the times she or her brother would catch a cold, and their mother would make them eat garlic and fermented and honey. Then there were the onions on the soles of the feet to draw out the toxins and whatnot. The worst was the fire cider her mom made every year and made everyone drink. To this day, Mallory could shoot any kind of liquor with a straight face thanks to some of the breathtaking concoctions her mother made her drink as a child. If her mother had still been alive today, she would have harassed and teased her about her medicines contributing to the reason that she had grown to enjoy alcohol so much. "Is there anything else you'd like to know about me, dear Mallory?" Troy asked her after a while of her just standing there staring off into space. Licking her dry lips, she did have a couple of questions. "Who changed you?" "No one changed me. I was born this way, just like my parents had been and theirs before them. When I reached the age of 29, I was sealed into my immortality and began needing blood regularly. Before this, I was like any young man, only stronger, faster, and more intelligent." Troy's response earned him a snort from Mallory. "It's a high opinion of yourself." "Not an opinion, just facts." Her skin was crawling, and she felt a small tremor running down her spine. His proximity for so long was starting to bring out her feral side. Mallory began slowly pacing the far side of the room. How was it possible to crave someone that you wanted gone from your life forever? "Are you enjoying your book?" Troy asked her from his chair, his eyes tracking her movements around the room. "She is not my favorite author. I would have preferred something more modern," she answered truthfully, not caring if it offended him. "I'll bring you something different. My mother enjoyed Jane Austen, and many of her books are still within her collection." Mallory paused in her pacing and asked, "Where is your mother now?" "Dead, along with my father, who I'm killed after he murdered my mother. He swore it was an accident, but even if it was, he deserved it." Troy's response was cold and devoid of emotion. She felt surprised that yet again he would share such an intimate detail about his life. She had wondered if his parents were still living, considering he had stated he was immortal. As she started pacing again, she could feel the tension in the room increase. Her pull was begging to have more of his energy, and she could feel how eager he was to give it to her. "Will you come to me willingly, my pet, and let me give you what you desperately need?" Troy's voice was dangerous and seductive, and it made her stomach muscles clench. "I am not your pet," she told him, pausing in her pacing as her heart started to beat faster with the prospect of what was to come. "That is neither here nor there, Mallory, but the question remains the same. Will you only let me feed from you and nothing more?" She knew the answer before it came, but she wanted to hear him say it. "You're not naive, dearest. You know all that I want from you." "Then I guess you can fuck off, Troy," she said. Mallory felt a sense of accomplishment that she had said his name in a vulgar way. She got the impression that he wasn't a fan of cursing, which only added to her insult. Instead of anger, she heard him laugh. "If you want to play games, then let us play," he said as he slowly rose from the chair and began walking towards her. Mallory stopped her pacing and pressed her back against the wall that was furthest away from him. Fear and excitement stirred inside of her. When he was only a couple of feet away from her, he stopped. She glanced into his eyes and felt a wave of his lust. Her body was begging for her to go to him instead of giving in to her need, she hissed as her teeth and claws extended to their full length. Without breaking eye contact with her, he reached into his back pocket. Bracing herself, she waited for the needle she was sure he would pull out as she prepared herself to try and run past him. Instead of a needle, she saw a black pocket knife in his hand. Was he planning on stabbing her for her misbehavior? Carefully, he opened the knife to reveal a sharp, short blade. "I want you to beg me for my blood, Mallory. I also want you to beg me to feed from you. You will not touch me until you beg me of these things. Do you understand?" He waited for her response, but when she remained frozen, he lifted his arm with the knife and brought it down on his forearm. A cut appeared, and blood welled into a crimson line on his skin. It felt like the room filled up with the scent of his strong, magnificent blood. It took her all of 2 seconds to lose her restraint and try to throw herself at him with her mouth open. As soon as she stepped towards him, Troy's hand shot out and wrapped around her throat. "You will not touch me until you beg for me. Beg for my blood, and beg for my teeth at your throat. Then you can have both. I will not rape you, but I will feed from you." He released her neck, and Mallory fell to the floor at his feet. Her body and mind were screaming at her to attack him now, but an invisible barrier was holding her back. She looked up at him, wanting to do what he told her. She wanted to beg, but she would not be his slave. Her body started to tremble as she fought an internal battle with herself. "I am not your pet," she yelled. He chuckled as he pressed the knife back into his skin on the arm and cut again. "Think that if it makes you happy, my dearest. But it won't change the position that you are in and always will be in." With that stated, he lifted his bleeding arm and dropped blood on her face. Moaning, she opened her mouth and caught a couple of droplets on her tongue. The entire room filled with a red haze as she tried to grab him again and pull him towards her. However, as soon as she reached out to him, the invisible barrier pushed her hands away. Fury and rage went through her, blinding her as she screamed and slammed her fists on the floor. "Beg me, Mallory. Beg me to give you what you need." "No," she growled in a voice that she didn't recognize as her own, then stood up and ran to the other side of the room, trying to escape his tantalizing scent and put distance between them. Even standing beside the bed, she could smell him like he was right beside her. In a rage, she flipped the mattress off the frame before sinking to the floor and grabbing her head in her hands. God, she needed it so badly. Her body was aching and screaming at her to attack him now. With slow and deliberate steps, she listened to him approach her. Standing too close, he squatted down in front of her. He had cut himself again, and it smelled like a river of blood was gushing through the room. "I will not allow you to taint our encounters with your venomous words. You will not say I raped you, and this time I will avoid touching you as much as possible. We both must be fed, however, and you will beg me. There is no way out of this, Mallory. You will do as I say, even if we spend the next few days in here together." Troy told her as he lifted his now bleeding hand to her face. Mallory looked up at his extended hand and felt an internal war raging within as she fought to throw herself at him. She wanted to tackle him and take him, yet she was somehow stuck on the floor. When Troy reached out and dragged his bleeding hand across her lower lip, she lost it and gave in to his demand. "Please let me have your blood, and please take mine." As soon as she mumbled those words, it was like the invisible barrier disappeared, and she launched herself off the floor and into his waiting body. As soon as she hit him, his arms wrapped around her and her teeth sunk into his neck. She felt him stand up from his squatted position and walk a few paces to the bed that was still on the floor. He laid her down and landed on top of her. Troy was true to his word and avoided humping her, even though her body was a bundle of burning nerves, needing his touch. At one point in her feeding, she was on top of him, rubbing herself against him, needing release. However, right before she was able to come, he flipped her onto her stomach, breaking the latch, and sunk his sharp fangs into the flesh between her shoulder and neck, denying her a release and taking what he claimed was rightfully his, her blood.